Unlike law-abiding Romeo and Juliet, who were lucky enough to be born into the noble families of Verona, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow had something completely bleak in perspective from childhood. Both were born into poor families with many children, and even though the Parker family had half as many children, only 3, but soon after the birth of Bonnie, her father died. The widow Parker moved in with her parents, and it was not easy for her to support her 3 daughters. The Barrow family had 7 children. Who lives better, a widowed seamstress with her daughters or poor bankrupt farmers on the verge of the Great Depression? Everyone is equally difficult. She was born on October 1, 1910. Petite beauty Bonnie Parker dreamed of a better life. To do this, of course, you need to study well at school and work hard, make efforts that will be rewarded. But the reward will be sometime later, and this is not certain, but I want to live well now. Elegant beauties smiled from movie posters, and would there be at least one girl in Texas who did not dream of becoming as brilliant? Even good girls can change their lives out of the blue. Bonnie met Roy Thornton when she was only 15 years old. Together, the teenagers dropped out of school and got married just a year later. This marriage ended in a break very soon. Roy disappeared from the house for a long time, without explaining his absences. Bonnie had to endure beatings, because her husband could not stand reproaches. She worked as a waitress, but on the eve of the Great Depression, work became difficult. The cafe closed. In early 1929, Bonnie separated from her husband. They did not get divorced, they just went in different directions, and the girl returned to her mother in Dallas. She got a job in another cafe and soon met Clyde Barrow. The films show that he came to a cafe, but Bonnie's biographers claim that they met at a friend's house. Unlike Bonnie, Clyde was never a good boy. He was born on March 24, 1909, as the 5th child. After him 2 more were born in this family. The boy was only 17 years old when he got into trouble with the law. At first, he did not return the rental car on time, and then, along with his older brother, he was caught stealing turkeys. Hard times for America had not yet come, and Clyde Barrow was breaking the law with might and main. He was already a criminal when he first met good girl Bonnie. In January 1930, when the first shock of the tragic stock market crash had passed, it became clear that things were very bad. Businesses were closed, unemployment took on the character of an avalanche, and, as in any unstable time, desperate people rushed headlong into crime. So for Bonnie Parker, meeting Clyde Barrow did not come as a shock. If life is grinning like a hungry wolf, you either need to grin more terribly or get ready to be eaten. Most biographers agree that in the first place it was love, and not at all the union of 2 sociopaths. Romantic and dreamy Bonnie managed to make sure that hard work leads to collapse much faster than the bumpy road of a robber. At least the burglar had the money and the cloudy veil of a gentleman of fortune. This is not to say that Clyde and hundreds of other farm boys became robbers on the wing. Since 1920, the agricultural crisis has mowed down farms one by one. For the workers of the village, the Great Depression began much earlier. He honestly tried. He studied music, tried to join the Navy, but it did not work out. The beggars of Barrow could not buy musical instruments, and the Navy did not take him for health reasons. The Army needs tough guys who ate well as children, and this standard was not for Clyde. He followed in the footsteps of his older brother. Buck Barrow robbed shops and stole cars. Buck did not become a rich bandit, but he suggested the direction to his brother. Clyde was imprisoned almost immediately after meeting Bonnie, but it was too late. She was waiting for her bandit. As a rule, he ended up behind bars for a short time. They caught him on petty thefts and unsuccessful robberies, so the terms were given relatively short. In prisons, riots broke out every now and then. Prisoners fled to freedom in batches. If outside it was bad and hungry, then behind bars it was even worse and hungrier. And Clyde hated poverty as his worst enemy. When they talk about Bonnie and Clyde, for some reason, it is a couple that jokingly robs banks, holds hands romantically and kisses against the backdrop of sunset. For some reason. In fact, the gang at various times included Clyde's friends from his time in prison, his older brother Buck Barrow and his wife Blanche. Even after imprisonment, riots and escapes, the profile of the Clyde gang has not changed much. They stole cars, robbed gas stations and small shops. Bank robberies began towards the end of his career, and it was short-lived, only 2 years, from 1932 to 1934. Raymond Hamilton, one of the gang members, threw a spectacular phrase before his death that Bonnie and Clyde enjoyed the deaths of other people and could look at the bleeding victims for a long time. There were indeed victims. Most often, those who did not want to part with their goods fell under the bullet, and sometimes the prey turned out to be ridiculous, not worth killing. Many biographers claim that Clyde had an unstable psyche, which may be why there were more victims than could have been. John Dillinger, a handsome man and womanizer, a charismatic bank robber, who acted in the same years, contemptuously called Bonnie and Clyde riffraff who dishonors the noble gangster craft, and considered them losers. Another point of view, which finds indirect confirmation, Bonnie and Clyde were just trying to survive. There are testimonies of people who were victims of kidnapping by the Clyde gang, but they were treated tolerably, dropped off on the side of the road when the danger of the chase was no longer on their nerves, left them some money to get home, decent clothes if necessary, it would seem. Would bloodthirsty monsters do this? At the same time, Clyde's gang fiercely resisted the police in any attempt to capture and used the entire arsenal. The casualties were inevitable. Bonnie wrote touching autobiographical poems, in which the main idea ran like a thin thread. She perceives this story as a kind of suicide. Surviving snappy photographs of Bonnie posing with a cigar in her mouth and with a weapon are more of a penchant for theatricality than an actual portrait. But thanks to these photographs, the Americans literally followed the adventures of the criminal couple with bated breath. If Bonnie Parker had nothing to take revenge on society, she cherished the shadow of a good girl deep down, then Clyde Barrow was not going to forgive the system for prison hardships. Apparently, there were reasons to be angry. On January 16, 1934, Clyde carried out a plan that had led him down the path of crime all this time. He made a daring and incredibly brazen raid on Eastham Prison and freed his accomplices Henry Methvin and Raymond Hamilton. Taking advantage of the commotion, several more prisoners escaped. While the gang was engaged in petty theft and robbery, it could still be tolerated. Compared to the magnificent Dillinger, it was a drop in the ocean. Texas in the 30s was seething like a witch's cauldron, and neighboring states could not boast of a peaceful life either. The Great Depression was gaining strength and was not going to give up, and desperate people could no longer imagine another world. But first, Bonnie and Clyde began to take the banks, albeit not always successfully, brazenly used the boundaries of police jurisdiction between the states. The Texas police could not do anything in Oklahoma Territory and vice versa, and then also attacked the prison with complete success. The public boiled over. The Department of Corrections did not kick just lazy. On the warpath came the Texas Ranger with a 20-year reputation as a well-deserved fighter against crime. Captain Frank A. Hamer was not known for illusions. He was hired to fix the problem, and he coped with his task with a bang, with his usual scope and effectiveness. The pursuit of Clyde's gang became more and more ruthless, and as a result of another police skirmish, Buck Barrow and his wife Blanche were seriously injured and detained. Buck never recovered from his wound, dying in the hospital, but Blanche, thanks to this arrest, remained alive and was able at one time to shed light on some controversial issues. She claimed that in recent months the Clyde gang had been driven by desperation. At the time of the arrest, the unfortunate women weighed only 37 kilograms. This is the degree of extreme exhaustion. Blanche's words are very hard not to believe. There was no intoxication of victory, they were saving their lives, and the occasional revelry was just an attempt to get rid of the horror for a while. Clyde Barrow turned into a seasoned criminal wolf who trampled the law into the dirt, and his wolf instinct did not allow him even a drop of alcohol. He preferred to be careful. Toward the end, they were both crippled. Clyde chopped off 2 of his toes while still in prison, and Bonnie suffered in an accident, after which she treated her badly burned leg for a long time and unsuccessfully. This affected mobility. Bonnie and Clyde are ambushed by Captain Hamer on a country road. Some historians believe that they were led down by their love for an armored car of the Ford brand, nicknamed Sandstorm. They were calculated on this car, and therefore armed with armor-piercing ammunition. They divided almost equally even the bullets. Clyde got 50 bullets, Bonnie a little more. May 23, 1934 ended the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Relatives did not fulfill their last will. The lovers were buried separately. The Parker family did not accept the fact that their little Bonnie loved a bandit and broke the law herself. Someday they will go down together, and they will bury them side by side. For a few, it will be grief, relief. But for Bonnie and Clyde, this is death. Thank you for your attention.